July 11th, 1943. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring believed the battle was already decided. In his mind, the Americans were finished. Their infantry was pinned to the beaches of Gela, the sea at their backs, nowhere left to run. The element of surprise was his. And moving into position was Germany's deadliest answer to any invasion. The Hermann Göring Division, led by the most terrifying machine of the Second World War, the Tiger tank. For over 2 decades, military doctrine had been clear. Foot soldiers, no matter how brave, could not survive a concentrated panzer assault without massive artillery support. By every rule of modern warfare, the Allied landing should collapse. Kesselring was preparing to inform Berlin of a crushing victory. He fully expected to drive the invaders back into the Mediterranean before midday. But one fatal mistake shaped his confidence. Kesselring believed he was facing a traditional army. He didn't understand that he was confronting an entirely new way of war. Within hours, his elite division would be shattered, not by enemy tanks, not by enemy aircraft, but by a force that, on paper, should never have been able to reach him at all. Albert Kesselring was 57 years old in the summer of 1943. A hardened veteran of the First World War and one of the most seasoned commanders in the entire German war machine. He had climbed the ranks of the Luftwaffe with precision and discipline. In 1940, he directed air operations during the Battle of Britain. Later, he masterminded the relentless bombing campaign against Malta, an assault so severe it nearly starved the island into surrender. Across the Mediterranean, Axis operations moved according to his calculations. But what truly defined Kesselring wasn't just air power. It was logistics. He understood factories, fuel, transport, and supply lines. He knew that wars weren't won only on battlefields. They were won by moving men and machines faster, farther, and in greater concentration than the enemy. These weren't theories to him. They were principles forged through 30 years of command. Which is why what unfolded in Sicily on July 10th and 11th stunned him. German intelligence had tracked Allied convoys leaving North Africa. As reports arrived at Kesselring's headquarters in Frascati, nestled in the hills, southeast of Rome, the numbers seemed impossible. There had to be a mistake. Someone must have added an extra zero. Reconnaissance pilots must have miscounted. 3,200 ships, not 300. Warships, transport vessels, landing craft, cargo carriers, hospital ships. The largest amphibious armada ever assembled in human history. And in the skies above it, not 400 aircraft, but 4,000 fighters, bombers, transport planes, an air force prepared to smother Sicily completely. Then came the final figure, 180,000 soldiers ready to land in the opening assault. Americans, British, Canadians. They came equipped with tanks, artillery, trucks, and enough ammunition to fight for weeks without resupply. In 25 years of service, Kesselring had never witnessed power on this scale. Even Germany's lightning invasion of France in 1940, the campaign that crushed Western Europe in 6 weeks, had required fewer resources. The invasion began on the night of July 9th, 1943. Under darkness, American and British paratroopers descended over southeastern Sicily. But nature intervened. Violent winds tore formations apart. Drop zones vanished. Some soldiers plunged into the sea and never surfaced. Others landed miles from their objectives. Entire units touched down so far off course that they spent the first hours of the invasion simply trying to locate one another. As a fighting force, the airborne troops were scattered, confused, disorganized. German staff officers took note and smiled. To them, it looked like proof that Allied planning had already failed. From his command post, Kesselring recognized an opening, and he moved to strike. Every amphibious invasion carried the same deadly weakness. The first 24 hours, before heavy guns could be brought ashore, before defensive lines could be dug in, before a fragile beachhead could turn into a fortress. Military strategists had studied this window for decades. Commanders lived for it, because this was the moment when an invasion could be shattered. If German armor struck fast enough, before American units could regroup, the landing force could be torn apart. The beaches could be isolated from one another, supply routes severed, entire divisions driven back into the sea before their overwhelming numbers ever mattered. Kesselring had seen it before. At Dieppe in August 1942, British and Canadian forces had been wiped out on the shoreline in less than 10 hours. The ocean behind them became a death trap. Water offered no escape, no cover, no path for reinforcements once the landing craft pulled away. When pressure came quickly and relentlessly, troops pinned between steel and surf didn't retreat, they broke. This wasn't theory. This was doctrine. This was exactly how counterattacks against amphibious landings were meant to unfold. And now, Kesselring acted. The order was clear. At first light, the Hermann Göring Division would strike. This formation embodied everything German warfare had refined through 4 brutal years. Born from Luftwaffe ground forces and bearing the name of the Reich Marshal himself, the division had been rebuilt in 1942 and early 1943 into a premier armored unit. Its men were ideologically hardened. Its officers were veterans forged on the Eastern Front. Training focused on speed, aggression, and adaptability under fire. But its greatest strength rolled on steel tracks. The Tiger tank. In 1943, no armored vehicle inspired more fear. Its frontal armor, 10 centimeters thick, was immune to Allied tank guns at combat distance. Its 88mm cannon, derived from the legendary anti-aircraft gun, could destroy enemy armor from over 2 kilometers away. In skilled hands, a single Tiger could block an entire road, holding off columns of advancing vehicles alone. 17 Tigers spearheaded the attack toward Gela on the morning of July 11th. Behind them followed Panzer III and Panzer IV medium tanks. Armored half-tracks carried infantry close behind the steel. Artillery units stood ready to rain fire on demand. More than 4,000 soldiers advanced with over 200 vehicles. German reconnaissance had already mapped American positions and charted the routes straight into the beachhead. From his headquarters hundreds of kilometers to the north, Kesselring received the reports he expected. This was the moment he had planned for. Hit hard, hit fast, exploit the disorder before defenses could take shape. The Hermann Göring Division had everything required to annihilate the landing: firepower, discipline, and absolute confidence. At 6:15 a.m., German columns began rolling south across the Gela plain toward the shoreline. The ground favored them. Flat farmland stretched ahead, ideal terrain for armored warfare. The roads, dry and dusty in the July heat, were suitable for tanks and supply vehicles. From assembly areas to American lines, the distance was less than 15 kilometers. At normal advance speed, the Tigers would reach the perimeter in under 2 hours. Reconnaissance reported little resistance ahead. The American 1st Infantry Division had landed with almost no armored support. Most of their tanks were still offshore, waiting to be unloaded. Artillery guns were scattered along the beach, not yet operational. Their defensive line extended barely 3 kilometers inland. By every rule of war, they were exposed, and the German hammer was already swinging. Darby's Rangers and supporting infantry held the town of Gela itself. They were determined, but they were dangerously underarmed. Nothing they had could stop a Tiger tank at distance. The small 37mm anti-tank guns issued to American units were ineffective, their shells incapable of piercing German heavy armor. On paper, the conditions favored a flawless counterstrike. As morning updates reached headquarters, Kesselring allowed himself measured confidence. What he could not observe from Frascati was the silent armada waiting offshore. And more critically, his intelligence services had underestimated what those ships truly represented. The Americans hadn't just landed soldiers on Sicilian soil. They had anchored an unprecedented weapon system just beyond the horizon, a floating wall of artillery. The Western Naval Task Force, under Vice Admiral Henry Kent Hewitt, formed a steel arc around the invasion beaches. Cruisers, destroyers, and support vessels took station offshore, carrying enough firepower to obliterate any ground formation within 30 kilometers of the coastline. USS Savannah, USS Boise, USS Birmingham, USS Brooklyn, USS Philadelphia. These were not passive escorts guarding troop transports. They were mobile gun platforms designed to deliver sustained industrial-scale destruction. A single Brooklyn-class cruiser like USS Boise mounted 15 152mm guns, arranged in 5 triple turrets. Each barrel could fire 8 rounds per minute. In 60 seconds, over 100 high explosive shells could be hurled onto a single target zone. Her magazines held enough ammunition to maintain bombardment for days. Guided by radar and mechanical fire control computers, her guns could strike targets far beyond visual range, up to 20 kilometers inland, with devastating accuracy. The destroyers added to the storm. Their 127mm guns were smaller, but faster, more numerous, and relentless. Dozens of them encircled the beaches. Together, they could turn entire sections of countryside into fields of shattered earth and burning steel. Unaware of it, the Hermann Göring Division was driving straight into a kill zone, far larger and deadlier than anything its planners had imagined. At 8:30 a.m., German forward elements collided with American defenses on the outskirts of Gela. Tiger tanks opened fire from long range, exactly as doctrine demanded. Their 88mm cannons methodically erased foxholes, machine gun nests, and defensive strong points. American infantry fell back toward the shore. Anti-tank shells struck the Tigers head-on and bounced away harmlessly. For an hour and a half, everything unfolded as the Germans expected. The armored columns pressed forward. Resistance thinned. The beaches seemed within reach. Then the sea answered. At 9:10 a.m., USS Boise received fire coordinates from shore. Naval Gunfire liaison teams embedded with American units had been transmitting exact positions of the German advance. Now those numbers were fed into the system. Guns swung toward land, elevation adjusted, range calculated by mechanical computers. Then the order was given. The first salvo erupted with a roar that echoed across the Mediterranean like rolling thunder. 43 seconds later, the shells arrived. For the tank crews of the Hermann Göring Division, nothing in their experience prepared them for what followed. High explosive rounds, weighing nearly 50 kilograms, began slamming down from a cloudless sky. There was no warning whistle, no distant muzzle flash, only sudden, overwhelming destruction. Naval shells, engineered to tear through battleship armor, were now detonating among tanks, vehicles, and infantry. There was no possible response. German artillery couldn't reach ships positioned 20 kilometers offshore. Air support never came. The Luftwaffe had already been driven from Sicilian skies by overwhelming Allied air dominance. The enemy remained unseen, beyond the horizon, untouchable by any weapon the division possessed. And the bombardment had only just begun. Shortly after 9:30 a.m., confusion reached Kesselring's headquarters. Messages from the front no longer made sense. The counterattack had lost momentum. Losses were escalating at an alarming rate, and no one could clearly explain why. Some field reports blamed airstrikes. Others spoke of artillery so powerful it defied belief. The reality was far more devastating than either explanation. Out on the Gela plain, the German advance was being torn apart. At 9:25 a.m., USS Savannah joined the bombardment. Her 15 main guns added another torrent of steel, more than 100 shells per minute, slamming into the advancing columns. Destroyers followed, amplifying the destruction. This was not suppressive fire. This was not a warning barrage. It was the deliberate dismantling of an armored division. The German attack didn't fade away gradually. It ended abruptly, as if the entire force had collided with an unseen barrier made of fire and shrapnel. Tiger tanks that had shrugged off every American weapon now burned across the open farmland. The naval shells didn't need to punch through their thick armor. Explosions tore apart tracks and suspension systems, freezing vehicles in place. Once immobilized, the tanks became helpless targets. Shrapnel ripped through open hatches, killing commanders and crewmen near misses, ignited fuel trucks, and turned ammunition carriers into fireballs, even inside sealed steel hulls. The shockwaves alone maimed the men within. By 10 a.m., 6 Tiger tanks were already gone, not destroyed by enemy armor, not knocked out by anti-tank guns. They had been eliminated by ships that could not be seen and could not be attacked. As reports continued to arrive, Kesselring struggled to comprehend what he was reading. His most elite formation was being erased by naval gunfire. Warships were destroying a moving armored force engaged in an active ground offensive. This defied everything he understood about modern combat. This wasn't how war was supposed to function. Naval guns were meant to batter coastal defenses. They supported landings. They covered troops crossing beaches. That was their role. But warships did not hunt panzer divisions 15 kilometers inland. The distances, the accuracy, the sheer volume of ammunition required, none of it fit within established military doctrine. Yet the Americans were not bound by doctrine. Between 9, 10, and 11 a.m., the Naval Task Force unleashed more than 3,700 shells onto the Gela plain. In a single morning, American ships delivered more artillery fire than most German divisions received during an entire month on the Eastern Front, and they could keep firing. Ammunition ships waited offshore, loaded with tens of thousands of additional rounds. American industry had produced more than a navy. It had created a mobile, ocean-based artillery system, incontinental in scale, capable of being deployed anywhere the sea could reach. At 11 hours, the commander of the Hermann Göring Division ordered a withdrawal. The counterattack had not merely failed, it had been obliterated in less than 4 hours. 10 of the division's 17 irreplaceable Tiger tanks were destroyed, disabled, or abandoned. Hundreds of soldiers lay dead or wounded across the Gela plain. What remained of the division retreated into the hills, northwest of the beaches, beyond the reach of naval guns. The American beachhead at Gela held. The attack, meant to hurl the invasion back into the sea, had been crushed by firepower launched from beyond the horizon. And with grim clarity, Kesselring understood what had just occurred. The Americans had solved the central dilemma of amphibious warfare. Landing troops were always most vulnerable. In the critical early hours, before heavy weapons could be unloaded, organized, and brought to bear. At Gela, that weakness had vanished. Every war college on Earth taught the same lesson. From antiquity onward, commanders knew exactly where to strike. Hit the enemy while he is still arriving. Before formations solidify, before weapons are in place, before command and control can function, that moment, half ashore, half prepared, was the weakest point of any amphibious assault. And yet, at Gela, that weakness no longer existed. The Americans had erased it. They had transformed their warships into roaming artillery platforms. A single cruiser anchored offshore could unleash more firepower than an entire field artillery regiment on land. and it could do so within minutes of receiving coordinates. It could fire continuously for hours. It could shift position faster than any ground battery. And unlike land-based guns, it could not be overrun, could not be flanked, could not be captured or destroyed by a counterattack. This wasn't simply a new tactic. It was an industrial breakthrough applied to combat. Constructing Brooklyn-class cruiser demanded shipyards on a scale Germany did not possess. Operating them required trained naval forces and years of institutional development. Feeding them ammunition required manufacturing output that the Axis powers could never hope to match. The shells smashing into the Hermann Göring Division were not just explosives. They were the physical expression of an entire economic system, mobilized for total war. By the end of that morning on the Gela plain, Kesselring had lost more than 10 Tiger tanks. But more importantly, he had lost the initiative in Sicily. The campaign dragged on for another 38 days. But its outcome had already been decided on July 11th. Without the ability to smash the beachheads, German forces could no longer dictate events. From that point forward, Kesselring had only one option: withdraw and fight for time. The Hermann Göring Division never regained its offensive strength. Its remaining Tigers were committed in fragments, used defensively rather than mass for decisive blows. Across July and into early August, American and British forces advanced steadily. Their flanks were shielded by naval guns capable of striking targets 30 kilometers inland. Any German unit that gathered for a counterattack was immediately detected and destroyed by fire from the sea. Positions that appeared defensible on maps became impossible to hold once naval bombardment began. Palermo, the Sicilian capital, fell on July 22nd. Catania on the eastern coast followed on August 5th. Messina at the island's northeastern tip, just 3 kilometers from mainland Italy, fell on August 17th. Amid the collapse, Kesselring achieved one final success: Operation Lehrgang. Between August 11th and August 17th, German and Italian forces executed a massive evacuation across the Strait of Messina, using ferries, barges, and small boats under relentless Allied air attack. More than 100,000 troops were withdrawn to the mainland. Kesselring saved his army, but he could not save Sicily, and he could not escape the truth revealed at Gela. The war Germany was fighting had fundamentally changed, and Germany no longer possessed the means to win it. What happened at Gela did not remain isolated to Sicily. Its lessons echoed across the Mediterranean and eventually across the English Channel. At Salerno in September 1943, German armored counterattacks once again surged toward Allied beachheads, and once again, they were torn apart by naval gunfire. Panzer formations, attempting to drive the invaders into the sea, were broken by cruiser and battleship bombardment before they could reach the shoreline. At Anzio, in January 1944, where Allied troops carved out a foothold south of Rome, USS Brooklyn alone fired more than 4,300 main gun rounds in just 1 month of combat support. Then came Normandy, June 1944, the largest amphibious invasion ever attempted. There, naval artillery smashed German armored reserves long before they could threaten the beaches. On D-Day, the 21st Panzer Division encountered the same invisible wall of steel that had destroyed the Hermann Göring Division a year earlier on the plains of Sicily. For the rest of the war, Kesselring fought defensively in Italy. He constructed the Gustav Line across the peninsula. He held Monte Cassino for 5 relentless months against repeated Allied assaults. Every kilometer of Italian ground cost the Americans and British time and blood. But one thing never happened again. Kesselring never tried to throw an amphibious landing back into the sea. At Gela, he had learned what American power truly meant. Not bravery alone, not tactics alone, but production. He had seen what occurred when German skill and determination collided with American industrial capacity. The numbers could not be beaten. The war would rage on for nearly 2 more years. Millions more soldiers and civilians would perish. The Nazi regime would fight until its final collapse. But for Kesselring, watching his elite panzer force disintegrate under fire from ships beyond the horizon on July 11th, 1943, the ending was already coming into focus. Germany was no longer fighting an opposing army. Germany was fighting a system that built cruisers faster than Germany could build tanks, a system that produced shells faster than Germany could train replacements, a system that replaced losses faster than Germany could inflict them. And production systems do not exhaust themselves. They don't panic. They don't lose resolve. They simply keep turning out weapons until the enemy has nothing left to resist with. The 17 Tiger tanks burning on the Gela plain were not just a battlefield setback. They were a preview of Germany's future. Thank you for watching. If you found this story powerful, consider liking the video and subscribing to support the channel. We explore the forgotten moments of World War II, where human courage collided with industrial reality, and where hidden decisions reshaped history. Where are you watching from today? And which World War II stories should we uncover next? Tell us in the comments below. Your support helps us continue bringing these stories to life. Until next time,